Yes, my name is Barb Doggett. I have been married to Ian for 35 years. We have 6 kids. Ian has been bivocational. He's been an Old Testament professor at 3 different seminaries, and we've also been church planting alongside. And we're in our 4th church plant now. And I've had the real privilege of being a ministry supporter for him. This time I'm an unpaid ministry coordinator working next to him. I write the liturgy for our church and help administrate some of the teams and things that are happening until God provides help, which I hope he will provide soon. But have had the real privilege of being a helper in the ministry, which I think is an amazing and wonderful thing.
And I'm Sue, and Ron and I have been married for almost 46 years, and we have 3 grown boys and 5 grandkids. And I worked at the Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation for about 15 years, which I was the human college fund for our family. During that, I did counseling there, and I also did editing a number of books, that some of which are still being published by P&R, which is just great. And I still do freelance counseling and editing, and work with Ron with the work that he described earlier, working with pastoral teams overseas.
Hi, we've met. I will say, my husband's been on this session at Reformed Presbyterian Church for a number of decades, and we're sort of the oddball ones here in the sense that I'm the one that's been in professional vocational ministry, right? And Fred's been more involved in the local church, and so I would say our little claim to fame is just like you went to seminary with Bryce. Like my husband went to Christian school with Misty, so. Leesburg Christian School. So anyway, so that's pretty much where my perspective comes from. So, thanks.
I'm Wanmin Kim. I'm married to Robert, and if you know anything about Robert, he loves to do lots and lots and lots. We met in seminary, and yeah, I used to just watch him and get tired just sitting around watching him back then, and now I'm even more tired kind of hanging out with him with all the stuff that he's doing. So we've been married for 20 years. We have 3 kids. And so in my role, we planted Grace Point Church 12 years ago, and I've always been in ministry with him. And that's been an interesting role, especially in our denomination, knowing that many wives are not in ministry, but being in a more supportive role. So I'm on staff as the women's ministry director, although we're now in transitioning out of the church in 2 weeks. I'm transitioning out. Robert has already left me at the church by myself. So there's just been a lot of change, and navigating some of that has been really difficult. I've been now I get to work with Ron and Sue at Surge, and that's been lovely. Over the years, I've taught gymnastics. I've worked at an engineering company, just done a lot of different things to put Robert through school and, write Bible studies at night, just doing whatever fits in our ministry life.
Great, thanks. Now, one question came in specifically for Stephanie, so why don't you answer that before we jump into some of the others.
All right. So this one had to do with what I had mentioned about a handicap accessible restroom, and particularly a family restroom. So the idea of having an adult changing table, especially if you have either kids who are physically disabled in wheelchairs and their parents can no longer pick them up, right? Or you can't use a nursery table, or you have adults that have Alzheimer's, right, and maybe need assistance that way. So what I'd recommend is really honestly, if you Google it, adult changing table, you can find places like Maxability, right? Or if you go to someone, I think every area has a medical supply folks have people who specialize in ADA compliance, right? And so can actually help you to decide what might be the best fit there. But, if you are doing some renovations or looking at making your facility more accessible, and a family restroom that's really kind of adaptable to all sorts of different needs is a great option. And that's places like in Lancaster, we have a United Disability Services, and they specialize in helping do home accommodations, could help you in the same way at a church. So, and anybody look for the same thing in your county, you'll find it. So.
Great.
This is me.
Great,
Oh,
thanks.
this is me.
So let's talk a little bit about calling, sense of calling, in a number of settings that I'm familiar with, like assessment centers for church planners, for overseas workers, what we do at Surge with candidates coming in. Part of that process is usually talking with the couple together and asking husband and wife, to what extent are you united on your sense of calling to this ministry that you're exploring? Honestly, that often doesn't happen in our Presbyterian context. Our wives in the Presbyterian context are usually never interviewed at all or asked where they fit in. And sometimes I think we end up with surprises once we're in ministry because the spouses aren't on the same page. So would you speak to that? To what extent do ministry couple and the wife in the ministry couple need to have the same sense of calling? How do you deal with that when you don't? I don't know if Sue, you want to tell any of our story, but the last thing in the world Sue ever wanted to be was a pastor's wife. That delayed her accepting my invitation to get married by a long time while she wrestled through that with the Lord, and then she ended up being the best pastor's wife in the world. But anyway, just saying.
I may as well start. It's just to clarify what he said. But yeah, it did take me, I absolutely knew I wanted to be married to him, but I did not know if I, A, wanted, or B, could be a decent pastor's wife. And so in my case, the Lord used that struggle to, and even after I did say yes to him and we were in ministry, to use that struggle to kind of uncover where I did not understand the gospel at all for my life. I think I was just consumed with performance anxiety and a need for people's approval. And I think that I have met so many folks in ministry who they preach the gospel, but they do not let it be for themselves. They feel bound by all these external demands, and they do not rest in the fact that if you surrender your heart to the Lord and you've really given your heart over to Him vertically, you have a lot more freedom horizontally in terms of the way you do ministry and how you are, just how you live it out. Every pastor's wife and every pastor is different. And it's supposed to be that way. And I did not have the freedom in Christ at first to embrace that and to just sort of let that be the way I did my life. I think that there's also cultural shifts. You know, when a generation above me, you know, do you play the piano and can you teach Sunday school? I really haven't done either one of those things. I've done other things, but I haven't been run out of town on a rail. So, and then people below me, you know, younger than me, the need for a second income has been overwhelming, and there are other reasons that the wife would need to work. So I just think the Lord gives freedom if the heart is surrendered.
When Ian was in seminary and Tim Keller was teaching practical theology, he taught the young men, if your wife is not called, you are not called. And he said that really clearly and emphatically. And I think I've always been grateful that he did that. And they lived that out because when he was first called to New York, Kathy did not feel called.
for quite a while, and it was about 6 months where she said no. And guess what? God can change our hearts and absolutely change our minds. And I think once we understand that our God, like, his plan will not be thwarted by people, he will, morph us, he will woo us to do his will, then there's a lot of freedom, to be honest. And it's pretty unwise, probably, to put a couple in the ministry when the wife is not also called.
So when we first got married, Robert was actually called, well, he thought he was called to overseas missions. And I was like, I don't know about that. But as time went on, I felt called to marry him. So I was like, what does that mean exactly? And I love what you just shared, Barbara, because, I asked Josiah Bancroft, who works at Surge, I was like, can you give me a nugget regarding calling one time? And he was like, Lundman, these days, too many people in ministry have over-mysticized calling. God gives us the desires of our hearts. We pursue those desires unless he shuts the door. I was like, that makes so much sense. I was like, I knew I was called to him, but I was like, Lord, what country does that mean? Can you tell me first so I know in advance before? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what it looks like ahead, but the same God who calls Robert, he wouldn't call me and tell me something completely different because I knew that we were called. Even that I was a little confused about early on. I was like, so what does that mean? If I'm married, is that forever? I'm like, oh, it really is. And so, all along the way, just clarifying what that means and what that looks like, because every year our life has been very different. I never thought I would be doing administration again. In an organization, I didn't know what that would look like. Right now I'm doing coaching, and I'm like, what does that exactly mean? I always thought I would be doing women's ministry for the rest of my life. So every day, being married to Robert, as God calls him to new things, what's lovely is he always says, "Hun, what do you think?" And right before we planted Grace Point, we're talking, it was a worship service. I was like, oh man. And he was like, what do you think? I was like, if we come here, it's going to be a lot of work. He was like, what do you think? I was like, all right, I'll go. And so here we are in Philly.
Yeah, good, thanks. Let's just shift gears. And, Stephanie, you want to add anything?
I'm not really in the same category, so
Let's talk about marriage and family and ministry and how they intersect, following up on the discussion we had with the men already. And I think Brian's comments were great in terms of the overview of how those fit together, and they're both important ministries that we're called to the church, to the marriage and family. But what have you learned in your experiences about how to put that all together? Like I said, it hasn't been easy for us, for me, over the years in terms of my blind spots, and I'm thankful for the gospel at work in my heart and my wife's heart in terms of working through those things. But who'd like to speak to that?
I'll say go.
Yeah.
I just want to say one quick thing about that. I think a lot of being in ministry is becoming comfortable with unfinished business, right? And those of us that are perfectionists in the crowd, we're recovering perfectionists, right? You always want to finish the job somehow, and in ministry, the job is never finished. And whether it's ministry at the local church or the denominational level, right? It's because we're part of the already not yetness of the kingdom. And so unless we become comfortable that we're just agents of God's kingdom, we are not. Again, as Brian's been so well reminding us, we are not the saviors. We're the ones in need of a savior. We're just the vehicles through whom God works, right? And even in vocational ministry, you just have a different role of still being agents on a peer level, with other believers who are brothers and sisters in Christ. And so really becoming comfortable with that, it's unfinished business, because in my human finiteness, I have a finite role. God's still got it, right? And so being able to put your head on the pillow at night, whether it was in my ministry of having to raise money, for what we did at M&A or that type of thing, or whether it's in your local congregation in terms of dealing with ongoing care for people. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
I grew up as a missionary kid and a pastor's kid, and my parents were missionaries in the era where if you put your family before the ministry, you were considered very ungodly. And so I think we were ministry orphans in many ways, and that did not go well for anyone in my family. And so when it came time for us to make decisions about parenting, we decided that one of us would always be on duty for our children and available. And at all times, if Ian was busy with something, then I was going to be home and available. And then if I was busy and he wanted me to be in ministry, then he was going to have to do it. And that we weren't going to have other people be raising our children. We just made those decisions. And I don't look back on that with regret at all. I think our children grew up believing that they were far more important to us. Anybody can pastor a church, but only we are the parents to our children. And my husband's his suitability for shepherding a church is gauged by how he shepherds that flock, and does he do a good job of being their dad. And I'm grateful that I had a husband that did not leave our kids an orphan, did not give me cause to be a wife, but was in parenting with me by my side all the time. And that is still bearing fruit in our kids' lives, I think, in a really beautiful way. So that's what we thought.
I was talking to somebody earlier today, and we were just commenting that pastors' wives are married to the pastor. They are not married to the church. And there is a helpful distinction there that you have, as a woman, as a wife, a primary calling to advocate for your husband and your family in whatever way you do ministry in the church. And sometimes, Ron has alluded to, there have been some times when our balance was not ideal, and I felt that part of my responsibility of being a suitable helper was to be willing to have conflict over this, and to say, we need more of your time. I know you have these other things going on, but you need to block out times for us. And we was always home for dinner, which was extremely helpful. But we also just sort of blocked stuff out for the two of us, but for the family. And he didn't necessarily explain that. He says, "Oh, I'm just sorry, I'm busy that time slot." He didn't need to explain what he was doing. He says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm booked," And it's perfectly okay to do that. So that's all.
No, that's great.
From this vantage point now, I'm thankful that my wife engaged in conflict and spoke into my life when I needed it. I wasn't always happy in the moment, but looking back on it now, I'm so thankful. So for all of you who are earlier in ministry, pray for that and ask the Lord to give you that kind of honest communication with each other. And for the wives that are here, don't be afraid to be bold and speak into your husband's life if he really needs it. That's why the Lord has given us wives, to help us see things that we don't see alone. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. I think it's always necessary to stop and have a conversation, because I think, as the men said, the seasons of life change so quickly. So early on, we made a rule, didn't last that long, made a rule that Mondays, and when our children were small and were home, it was so easy. That was our family time. Made the rule with church, they're not allowed to call us, not allowed to do this. But then all of a sudden, he joined the school board, and then Mondays are out the window because that's all the school board meetings. And our children are in school anyway, so it's what do we do now? How do we balance this? So we're breakfast. And then all of a sudden, our high schooler is going to school at 6 a.m. So we're okay, that doesn't work. So then dinner. And then it was coaching. And at one point, one of our congregation members said, "Why does Pastor Rob coach everything in your district? You have 3 kids. He's coaching all of them." They're that's just too much time. And I was they're he should stop that. And I was absolutely not. I was that coaching time is his time with his kids. And I was and it's his time with the district. But still, I was so we had to constantly navigate, constantly be in communication. And what I appreciated most was, he would always ask me, and at times where life was moving so fast, it would make me pause. And I'd say, oh, actually, I haven't seen you in a while. He was like, all right. So tonight, he's like, you want to hang out? And actually, even that was something stressful because early on, people gave us all this advice. And sometimes, advice, you're like, it doesn't always work for us. They said we had to go on dates. We didn't have any money for dates. I was like, getting a babysitter was so stressful. I was like, and then he would say, okay, you want a date? Get a babysitter and make it work. And I was like, then it's not a date. I don't want to do the work. So even in that, I was like, how do we balance marriage and family? I was like, you ask me out, you set it up, you get the babysitter. He was like, we don't have any money. And I was like, then make it work. And I was like, then it's not a date. I don't want to go out with you anyways. I was like, we're done with that. So what would happen was at night, like that was such bad advice. I realized I don't actually want to go out. I just want to, our kids went to bed early and we would just go to bed and hang out. Like, let's just watch a movie and do nothing. We'd sit in our bed, watch a movie. And I didn't want to talk all the time. He was like, you want to talk? No, I'm tired from talking. I talked to the kids all day. So navigating that, and what I appreciated was he listened to me, because I think every wife needs something different. Like, how does your wife want to be loved? Like, I love Bruce Finn. So he is a church planner in the area, and one time we're on a panel, and I was like, every wife needs something different. So I was like, what the husband needs to do is love their wife actively and well. And Debbie was like, yeah. I was like, what do you guys do? And she was like, I told Bruce that in the mornings, I just want him to make my coffee. And if you know them at all, she's not an emotional person. She gets really choked up. She's like, and he's done that the whole time. And I was like, Bruce, you have it so easy. He was like, I know.
I'd say one more. I just want to piggyback off of what you said with a special needs example, right? So with a lot of times, we talk about trying to keep balance in your life with special needs parenting and the extra responsibilities that come with that. And so I think there's some parallels here between that and church life. And one of the things we used to talk about was how you get your tires balanced. If you're driving your car and the tire's not balanced, it goes whop, 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 right? You can tell what things are going whop, whop, whop in your family. We said just sort of like start to listen to our kids, not just verbally, but behaviorally, and just what are the signs to us that we have hit a whop whop and we need to do a rebalancing of the tires, or a rebalancing of our marriage, or a rebalancing of whatever. And so I just encourage you to just listen, to what the unique dynamics are, right, in your own family. So
great, thanks. Talk a little bit about friendship and what you found to make a difference in your lives in ministry, as Pastor Blythe, or in Stephanie's case. Just like the men, you need confidants, you need people you can trust, you need people you can go to. Has that been possible for you within your local churches? Have you needed to go outside? What have your experiences been?
I can start with this since I just did this. So now that I'm transitioning out of the church, we planted this church 12 years ago. Like, for me, it feels like my baby. And there were discussions that happened within the church leadership that, although I'm really close to a lot of the women, it's not appropriate for any of them to know any of this. And I told the elders, this is your story to tell. All I'm saying is my last day at Grace Point is May 31st. So one of the things that I told the elders was, can you pay for a counselor for me? And I'm joining 2 parakaleo groups so I can talk to other church planters and ministry people on a regular basis. So for me, I just tell them what I need, and what's lovely about my elders is usually they take care of me. And I've done that for the other pastors. I was like, this family needs this. I was like, can you make it happen? I was like, this family needs this. And having that advocacy in that way. So for me, I have my seminary friends, but even that, like, it's hard because we don't always stay close. I have my other girlfriends, but again, they don't know my church context. They're not all in ministry. So Parakaleo, I don't know if you know, is a ministry for church planters' wives and ministry wives. That's been a huge resource because I felt understood. And I have the benefit of reaching out to some cool older ladies around me. And anytime I get an ear, I'm like, so, tell me about this. I'm like, tell me about this. Like the first time Sue came over, I was like, all you ladies, tell me what your favorite book is. So I'm going to read it. And so, yeah. Just having all the people.
Thanks.
I grew up, when I was first in ministry, like with Ron, the story was you should not have any friends, close friends in the church. And I found that very intimidating because the church, you're up to your eyeballs with the church life and the community that you're seeking to build. But I think we have been blessed by we've been in two churches our whole time of ministry, and they were both plants, church plants. And so in terms of creating a church culture and a ministry culture, we were able to avoid a very hierarchical thing where we were way up on one level and other people did not feel comfortable relating to us. And I think also we tried to, we had two things. Very strong emphasis on avoiding gossip and doing Matthew 18, that if you have an issue with somebody, you go to that person. You don't go to the other people behind their back. You talk it out. So you're eliminating the need for gossip, the problem of gossip to a great extent. And also, if you have any reasonable sense of your own shortcomings, and Ron's mantra, it wasn't original to him, but that pastors should be the chief repenters of the church. So that kind of awareness of your own frailties, it just removed a lot of barriers, and it created being vulnerable and honest about your own needs and weaknesses, and going to the right people about the right things made it a much safer atmosphere to have friendships in the church. I just talked to somebody about a big problem in their family, and that person said, "Well, I know I can tell you because it's like putting it in the vault. I'm not going to tell anybody." And so you be a safe person, and people will take care of you. I've been in a prayer group of 3 or 4 women, probably 25 years, and they're women from my church. And we have carried each other's burdens in wonderful ways. And I'm very thankful that I have other resources. I have other pastors' wives, and I have a mentor who's now 93 years old, and she still mentors me. But I'm very thankful that I can have a safe place within my congregation. And it's praying about the church culture that you nurture to make that possible, I think.
I've actually had a very hard time with this, I think, developing friendships within the church, not because I don't love the people in the church, but real friendship is reciprocal, and I think that we are not viewed in a reciprocal way. When people form a friendship with us, it's very one way, and I've heard many ministry people say that. So I'm a counselor as well, and often when I'm with women and I'm wanting to establish a relationship, they're wanting a counselor. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about their problems all the time, and it's not this reciprocal friendship. Many times I have really worked at a friendship and entrusting people, and then before long, that woman's husband had an altercation with the session. Mm-hmm. They left the church angry, and she shared things that I had shared privately with her. So it's tricky. It's not an easy thing. There's not a super easy answer. And I've been burned a lot, which doesn't make me think that I'm going to stop. I want to live an open life with people. And Ian and I, we do that. We live pretty openly. When we need help, we've gotten marriage counseling. People in our church know that. But instead of talking to people about our marriage in the church like others might, we're probably going to have to go get help, right, and get counseling so that we're not burdening people in the church with those things. But I have found this to be really, really hard. I think that Ian and I are very close in our relationship and are very satisfied with that closeness. We're very close to our children. Those are also super satisfying relationships. And I'm working on being friends with women. I have to kind of make myself work on that. But I think within the church, it's not going to be the same reciprocal type of friendship that I see the women having with each other. But I am looking for that elsewhere and working on that because I need it.
Thanks. Yeah, and that's a good reminder that situations are very different, different church cultures. Stephanie, do you want to add?
I was just going to say, we try to be the safe people. And I think my parents really set that example for us. Growing up, my folks were always the kind of people where the pastors, or the youth pastors, whoever, they would take them under their wing, and it was a safe place to go. So that's what we've tried to do in our marriage. So.
Great. Well, thank you. We should wrap up because dinner is coming soon, but thank the women for all